A married woman trapped in a loveless marriage secretly falls for the homeless young man her husband brought into their home, but what starts as comfort turns into a forbidden affair that destroys the entire family. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin our movie. The movie begins with Nick, a homeless young man who sleeps on the streets. He hasn't eaten or had anything to drink for days. One day, we see him standing in a dangerous street known for kidnappings and drug dealing. The police arrive to arrest him, but Nick manages to escape. While running away, he notices a fish shop that is still open, so he quickly goes inside. The owner of the shop, a woman named Betty who is in her 40s, asks him if he wants to buy anything. Nick tells her that he's just thirsty and only wants some water. Betty kindly brings him a glass of water, and he thanks her. As Nick is about to leave the shop, he suddenly feels dizzy and sits back down. He explains to Betty and her husband Joe that he hasn't eaten for a long time. Feeling sorry for him, they take him home with them. We then see them sharing a meal together, and Nick is overwhelmed with happiness. He tells them about his life, and we learn that he is an orphan who has been living on the streets for years. Joe and Betty decide to give him a job at their fish shop and even let him stay in their house. Nick enters a room filled with posters and photos, and Betty explains that it belongs to their son Danny, who is married and living in another city. She tells Nick that he can sleep there from now on. She also gives him pajamas and some of Danny's old clothes. Nick sincerely thanks them for helping him and promises that he won't disappoint them and will repay their kindness someday. The next morning, Joe takes Nick to the fish shop and starts teaching him how to work there and cut fish properly. Later that night, we see Betty sitting in front of the mirror, fixing her appearance. She notices that she is getting older and realizes how much she misses affection and emotional warmth. We also learn that Joe is always busy with his work and hasn't shown Betty any intimacy or attention for a very long time. At the same time, we see Nick taking a shower. When he comes out of the bathroom, he isn't wearing anything on his upper body, and Betty happens to be in his room. The moment she sees him, she becomes nervous, as if emotions she had buried for a long time suddenly started awakening inside her. Feeling overwhelmed, she quickly leaves the room and goes back to her own bedroom to sleep. The next day, Joe starts relying on Nick more at work and begins to trust him deeply. That night, the three of them are sitting together, but Betty is upset with Joe. Unlike him, Betty is ambitious and dreams of changing her life, while Joe seems completely consumed by the fish shop and work, with no interest in anything else. The following day, Nick comes home earlier than usual and accidentally sees Betty in the bathroom. He stares at her for a moment, but once Betty notices him, she quickly closes the door. After getting dressed, she comes out and asks Nick why he came home so early. Nick explains that Joe went to the fish market to buy supplies for the shop. At that moment, it becomes clear that there are growing feelings and attraction between them. Later that night, a group of thieves tries to break into Joe's car to steal it. Nick notices them and immediately rushes to fight them off. Joe sees what's happening and runs after him, causing the thieves to flee. Joe becomes deeply impressed by Nick's bravery and starts seeing him almost like a son. That same night, Nick struggles to sleep, and Betty comes to check on him. She asks if he's feeling sick, but Nick tells her that he has a headache. Betty then opens up about her unhappy life with Joe, explaining how she has been deprived of affection and longs for someone who truly cares about her. She slowly gets closer to Nick and begins touching him. At first, Nick tries to resist her, but eventually they begin a secret relationship together. After that, we see how happy Betty becomes. Her joy is obvious, and she seems truly alive again because of her relationship with Nick. Soon, the two of them start meeting in secret every day. While Joe sits in the living room watching a football match on TV, Nick and Betty secretly flirt with each other in the kitchen behind his back. Later, we see them at the fish shop, where Nick has become extremely skilled at the job. Around the same time, Danny suddenly returns from his trip with his wife Laura and their son. He wanted to surprise his parents, so he never told them he was coming. Betty hears Danny's voice while she is secretly spending time with Nick. She quickly gets dressed and rushes outside, shocked to see Danny standing there unexpectedly. When Danny enters his old room, he is surprised to find Nick staying there. He asks Betty who he is, and she explains that Nick works with them at the fish shop and has been living in their house. Danny immediately feels uncomfortable around him and becomes suspicious. At one point, Betty accidentally leaves one of her undergarments in Nick's room, but Nick manages to hide it before anyone notices. Shortly after, Joe comes home and is thrilled to see Danny again. The next day at the shop, Danny keeps provoking Nick with sarcastic comments, but Nick stays calm and ignores him. That night, Nick and Betty secretly meet again in the bathroom. Joe suddenly wakes up and walks toward the bathroom, hearing the sound of running water inside. However, he doesn't think much about it and simply goes back to bed while Nick and Betty continue hiding their relationship. Later, we see Nick alone in his room, secretly saving up the money he earns from working at the shop. After that, Joe asks Nick to deliver some fish to Laura, Danny's wife. When Nick arrives at her house, Laura is busy giving her baby a bath. She looks exhausted because the child has been crying non-stop, so she asks Nick to stay and help her until she finishes bathing him. Suddenly, Danny comes home and finds Laura and Nick together in the bathroom. Laura quickly explains that Nick had only come to deliver the fish and was helping her bathe their son. After hearing that, Nick quietly leaves, but Danny still feels uneasy and suspicious. That night, Betty waits for Joe to fall asleep so she can secretly go to Nick's room. However, Joe notices when she gets out of bed. For the first time in a long while, he gets close to her and tries to reconnect with her romantically after having neglected her for so long. But even during that moment, Betty's mind is completely focused on Nick. The next day, Betty and Danny sit together at a bar, and we learn that Betty has secretly been giving Danny money without Joe knowing. Danny tells her that he doesn't trust Nick and suspects that he has been having an affair with Laura whenever he delivers fish to their house. Later, during a family gathering, everyone seems happy as they dance and enjoy themselves together. While sitting at the table, Betty feels a foot touching hers from underneath. Thinking it belongs to Nick, she starts teasingly touching it back with her hand. But when Nick suddenly stands up and walks away, Betty realizes the foot is still there and it actually belongs to Danny. At that moment, Danny becomes completely certain that there is a secret relationship between his mother and Nick. He starts laughing mockingly, which makes Betty furious, and she storms over and slaps him. Afterward, Betty goes to Nick and tells him that she has some money saved up. She explains that Danny has discovered their relationship and insists that they should run away together before everything falls apart. However, Nick refuses because he knows it would completely destroy Joe, especially after all the trust and kindness Joe showed him. Later on, Nick runs into Laura and notices that she looks emotionally broken and exhausted. We learn that Danny has been abusive toward her and has made her life miserable for a long time. Feeling sorry for her, Nick goes back home and takes the money he had secretly saved from his work, intending to give it to Laura so she and her son can escape from Danny and start a new life. Danny returns home and discovers that Laura has run away with their son. Furious, he immediately calls Joe and tells him that Laura escaped with Nick, claiming that the two of them were having an affair. At that exact moment, Nick walks into the fish shop, and Joe quickly realizes that Danny's story doesn't make sense since Nick is clearly there with him. Danny becomes embarrassed after being exposed as a liar in front of his father, so he desperately tries to turn Joe against Nick. He tells Joe to check the money box and also accuses Nick of having a relationship with Betty. At first, Joe refuses to believe him, but when he checks the cash box, he discovers that some money is missing. Betty then walks in and admits that she was the one who took the money and secretly gave it to Danny without Joe knowing. Joe then confronts them about Danny's accusations and asks whether there is really something going on between Betty and Nick. Nick immediately denies it, but Betty becomes nervous and visibly frightened. Finally, unable to hide the truth any longer, she confesses everything to Joe. She admits that she and Nick have been having an affair and explains that Joe had neglected her for a very long time. She tells him that she needed love and attention while he was always consumed by work and ignored her emotionally. Betty even confesses that she loves Nick and wants to leave with him and run away together. The moment Joe hears those words, he completely loses control. In a fit of rage, he slaps Betty. Nick tries to calm him down, but Joe grabs him and starts beating him violently. Joe feels deeply betrayed because he trusted Nick, treated him like a son, and welcomed him into his home only for Nick to betray him and have an affair with his wife. Suddenly, Joe collapses to the floor and begins struggling to breathe. Betty rushes to call an ambulance, but before help can arrive, Joe dies from a heart attack. In the end, both Nick and Betty break down in tears over his death. That night, Nick returns to the fish shop, overwhelmed with guilt and grief over Joe's death. He breaks down crying, regretting the fact that he betrayed the man who trusted him and treated him like family. Holding a photo of himself with Joe, Nick starts remembering all the moments they shared together. Later, he walks to the beach, looking completely devastated and emotionally broken. Danny eventually finds him there and hands him Joe's knife, demanding that Nick kill him as punishment for everything that happened. But Nick refuses to do it and walks away. However, Danny follows him from behind, and in a sudden moment of rage, he stabs Nick with the knife and kills him. And that's how the movie ends. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like because it really helps support the channel, and make sure to subscribe for more videos. See you in the next one.